Daniel stood there for a moment longer, staring at the old wooden door that had slammed shut behind him. The room smelled faintly of dust and something else he couldn't quite place, like burnt paper mixed with damp earth. He forced himself to move deeper inside, his footsteps echoing on the cold stone floor. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been here. Just moments before, he remembered the letter that had arrived 2 weeks ago. The one written in shaky handwriting and signed only with an initial A. It hadn't made sense at first. Half of it was crossed out, and the other half spoke in riddles about a hidden truth and a debt left unpaid. He'd tried to ignore it, but something about those words kept him awake at night. Now he wondered if he'd made a mistake coming here alone. Daniel ran his fingers over an old desk pushed against the wall. A candle had burned down to a stub on its surface, wax hardened into a pool like a frozen lake. He spotted a torn photograph. Tucked underneath the candle holder, a family portrait, edges yellowed. Faces faded except for a woman's eyes that seemed to follow him, even in the dim light. He didn't know who she was, but she felt important, like a ghost clinging to the edge of his mind. A noise from somewhere above made him flinch. The floorboards creaked, but no one appeared. His chest tightened as he strained to listen. Maybe it was just the house settling, but the hairs on his arms told him otherwise. He stepped backward, hitting the edge of the desk. He had come here for answers, but every step forward seemed to bury him deeper in questions. And he couldn't help but feel that someone or something wanted him to find them. Daniel took a shaky breath and turned the photograph over in his hands, hoping for a name or date. Instead, there was only a single word scrawled in pencil: forgive. His mind raced through every memory of his childhood home, every fight he'd had with his father, every secret his mother had whispered when she thought he was asleep. He wondered if this place, this rotting old house hidden at the edge of town, was connected to all of it somehow. He slid the photo into his jacket pocket and moved past the desk, careful not to knock over the candle. The floor creaked under his weight, and he flinched at the echo. He hated how loud he seemed in this quiet. A door at the far end of the room stood slightly open. A draft pushed through the crack, carrying a faint smell of smoke. He hesitated before pushing it open wider. Inside was a smaller room, lined with shelves stacked with boxes and broken furniture. A single chair sat in the middle, its cushion ripped open, stuffing spilling out like the insides of an old toy. There was something on the C-tan envelope, yellowed at the edges like it had been waiting for years. Daniel reached for it, but his hand hovered in the air. He could almost hear his mother's voice warning him not to dig too deep, not to drag old ghosts into the light. But it was too late for that now. He picked up the envelope and felt how brittle it was, like it might fall apart in his hands. He didn't open it yet. He couldn't. Not with that same faint noise drifting through the floorboards above him. He wasn't alone here, he was sure of it now. And whoever else was in this house knew he was coming. Daniel slipped the envelope into his coat pocket, next to the photograph. His fingers brushed against something cold, a small key he didn't remember putting there. He pulled it out and held it up to the dusty light filtering through a crack in the boarded-up window. It was old and rusted, with a tiny tag tied to it. The tag was so worn he could barely read the smudged letters. Cellar. A memory stirred. Something his father had once said in anger during one of their late-night arguments about secrets buried, deep enough to rot but never die. Maybe this was what he'd meant. Maybe the cellar held whatever had driven his family apart all those years ago. Daniel's stomach twisted at the thought. Before he could move, he heard footsteps again, clearer. This time, someone was definitely upstairs. He backed away from the chair, trying to keep his own steps silent. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he nearly dropped the key. A message from his sister Emily flashed on the cracked screen. "Where are you? Don't do this alone," he should have told her. She'd begged him to let it go, but she didn't know what the letter said, or what he'd found hidden in their father's old study last month's maps of this place. Old receipts paid in cash, newspaper clippings about a missing girl from 30 years ago. He'd shown them to Emily, but she refused to believe their father could be tied to anything like that. Now, standing here in this half-rotten house, Daniel wondered if he really wanted to find out the truth. A floorboard above him groaned louder, followed by a faint thud. He pressed himself against the shelves, heart hammering. He pictured Emily at home, probably pacing the kitchen floor, waiting for him to call. She'd always protected him when they were kids. Now he had to protect her from whatever waited here in the dark. Daniel pressed his back harder against the shelves as the footsteps upstairs moved closer to the staircase. He could hear the slow creak of each step as whoever was up there made their way down. He clenched the rusted key in his fist, his breath shallow. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he forced himself to stay still. If they knew he was here, he'd lose whatever chance he had left to find the truth. The door at the far end of the hall groaned open. Daniel's eyes darted to the crack between the boxes. He could just make out a shadow moving through the narrow hallway, pausing now and then like they were listening for him. He tried to steady his breathing, but the sound of his heartbeat felt loud enough to give him away. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Emily. "Please answer me. I'm coming to find you." He wanted to text back, to tell her to stay away, but he couldn't risk the light from the screen. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and inched sideways toward the cellar door he'd seen near the back of the house. The shadow moved past the open door, and for a second Daniel saw a boot step into the room, then back out again. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. They were hunting. He felt sweat drip down the side of his face as he pushed the door to the cellar open just wide enough to slip through. The hinges squealed, and he froze. Praying the noise wouldn't draw attention, he slipped down the narrow stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The smell of damp earth and mold filled his nose. At the bottom, he flicked on his phone. Light, the weak beam catching on old crates and rusted tools. In the corner, he spotted a door with a heavy lock exactly where the key belonged. He could still hear faint movement above him, closer now, almost at the cellar entrance. He slid the key into the lock, pulse racing. Whatever was behind that door, it was his only way forward, and maybe his only way out. The key turned with a stubborn click that echoed through the cellar, louder than Daniel wanted. He twisted the knob and pushed the heavy door open just enough to slip inside. He killed the phone light, standing still in the thick darkness until his eyes adjusted. The air felt colder here, as if it hadn't been touched in decades. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, its pull chain brushing his shoulder. He gave it a gentle tug, and the light flickered on, buzzing weakly. The small room was lined with old filing cabinets, their metal sides streaked with rust. Faded folders were stacked in careless piles, spilling across a battered table. In the far corner, a tarp covered something large. Daniel's stomach tightened when he saw what looked like dried blood on the concrete near its edge. He stepped closer, forcing himself to lift the tarp just enough to see underneath. But before he could, a faint click behind him froze him in, place a gun being cocked. He didn't need to turn to know someone was standing at the cellar door. A voice broke the silence, low and familiar enough to chill him to the bone. "You should have listened to your sister." Daniel turned slowly, his eyes locking on to the shadowed figure, stepping into the weak light. It was his Uncle Mark, his father's younger brother, the one who'd vanished from family gatherings years ago with no explanation. Daniel remembered him as the one who always showed up drunk and angry, muttering about debts that couldn't be paid. Mark's eyes flicked to the tarp, then back to Daniel. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You really don't know when to stop digging, do you? Some things need to stay buried. Daniel's mind raced. If Mark had been here all along, maybe he was the one who'd sent the letter. Or maybe someone else had. He couldn't tell which part of this was planned and which was a trap. Thing was clear, now whatever secrets rotted in this cellar. Mark was ready to kill to keep them hidden. The key turned with a stubborn click that echoed through the cellar. Louder than Daniel wanted. He twisted the knob and pushed the heavy door open just enough to slip inside. He killed the phone light, standing still in the thick darkness until his eyes adjusted. The air felt colder here, as if it hadn't been touched in decades. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, its pole chain brushing his shoulder. He gave it a gentle tug, and the light flickered on, buzzing weakly. The small room was lined with old filing cabinets, their metal sides streaked with rust. Faded folders were stacked in careless piles, spilling across a battered table. In the far corner, a tarp covered something large. Daniel's stomach tightened when he saw what looked like dried blood on the concrete near its edge. He stepped closer, forcing himself to lift the tarp just enough to see underneath. But before he could, a faint click behind him froze him in pee.